Hello, my name is Chris Nissen, and welcome to our first video on the Deliver Uncompromised channel. I am especially pleased today to present to you a video that's an interview, a discussion actually, between Harvey Rishikof and Bill Stevens and myself. Harvey and Bill are two of the greatest minds that I've come across in over 30 years of working in national security. Harvey, in the legal sense, his resume just leaves you in awe. And Bill is a former, now retired counterintelligence director of the Defense Counterintelligence Agency, DCSA. This is a great conversation, and it's a rare opportunity to kind of get the insights from these two gentlemen who have decades of experience, have moved in circles that many of us can only dream of. It's been my pleasure to know Harvey for 8 or 9 years. I got to know Bill as we were teeing up for Deliver Uncompromised, so that'd be like the 2017 timeframe. Fantastic people, good friends, and it's a great discussion that I think is the perfect way to kick off what we're trying to do here with this channel and podcasts. And please enjoy. And my email is available in the about for anyone who wants to reach out. If you have additional questions, we can try to field them in the future and suggest additional programming. So enjoy. All right, so welcome to the discussion here on the term "Deliver Uncompromised" with Bill Stevens, former Director Counterintelligence at the Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency, DCSA, and Harvey Rishikof, Senior Counsel to the American Bar Association on the Standing Committee of Law and National Security. Bill, you and I have, and so all three of us have worked in delivering with Deliver Uncompromised and the concept in the past, but could you talk a little bit about the origin of where the term came up from? And because it's really launched a springboard in supply chain and counterintelligence security in the last few years.
So, well, the origins really go back to a National Counterintelligence Policy Board meeting back in 2010. I'd retired from the Air Force out after 27 years and gotten a job at Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, which was called at the time Defense Security Service. And every 6 weeks or 2 months, I would attend a national level meeting where all the senior counterintelligence people for most of the security intelligence type agencies meet. And at that meeting, I was in conversation with a friend of mine, Alan Brensentine, and he was lamenting that the organization he's part of actually had contracted for and received a capability, and that capability showed up compromised. And I thought, well, gosh, I've never worked with that type of activity very much. I chased bad guys directly, mostly in my career for 27 years, and it was a surprise to me that it wasn't a requirement that a capability would have to be delivered uncompromised. So I was kind of taken aback, and we had that conversation in that meeting, at the breaks during that meeting, and the notion that they should be delivering things uncompromised. Delivering uncompromised is a phrase that I started using, and started coming up with what that meant, what it might mean, and that's the way I would refer to it in my work. And then over time, eventually, Harvey would attend this meeting most of the time himself, as I think counsel to the director. And I talked to him about it. He thought it was a pretty good idea. And a couple of months later, he and I started talking about it more and more. And then Harvey came up with some concepts to start locking down the notion of how it is that we could start moving forward on this. I wrote an article, The T Factor, in the American Intelligence Journal that related in some ways to this kind of activity. And then we started nurturing it over time in the job that I was in. And we kept referring to it. We started presenting it at conferences, et cetera, as a notion. And people started catching on, I think, a little bit. And the counterintelligence community seemed to kind of like it. The security community seemed to be concerned because it would require things from them that they're not accustomed to doing. And the acquisition community couldn't stand it. And because it would upset their cost schedule performance approach to doing business. And that's fundamentally where that notion came from. And some able people over time started, I think, latching on to the concept and moving it forward, including you two.
It is interesting then. So you're saying basically it was a statement of the obvious, and sort of being an outsider, spending your time on probably the people side of counterintelligence more. You just assume the acquisition side was required to deliver things uncompromised. And it's funny, you run across things like that in the Pentagon and in government generally. I remember there's a piece of legislation for during the wars called never contract with the enemy. That always struck me as kind of odd that we have to have that as a mandate. You'd think it would be known, but sometimes you just have to state the obvious.
Oh, and that's a very good point. If you talk to the typical taxpayer, like my dad, for example, his immediate question is what mine was: don't we require that already? Isn't that part of what we do? Right? I can't believe that that's not part of what we do. And I think I don't want to make light of acquisitions challenge because it's significant and how they've developed their systems over time. They do have the most impressive weapon systems mankind has ever known. Unfortunately, they need to include the uncompromised nature of it, because the information and technology that's in the system and keeping that secret is at least as valuable as the weapon system itself today, because that information can be used to compromise expensive capabilities and keep us from being able to use them.
Right. So Harvey, what was it from your perspective, in your recollection? This is 2010, 2011, right?
Right. So I only want to correct the record slightly. At that time, when I was at the National Counterintelligence Executive, Bear Bryant was running it and had come from the FBI. And at that time, I was the senior policy advisor. Senior just because of my age. I've been old for so long. Hence, they always put the term senior. And there's nothing wrong with stating the obvious. It's actually how as I said, I've gotten tenure in 3 different institutions. It's one of those things that it's the aha moment. But as Bill was saying, we used to have these meetings quarterly with the counterintelligence groups and the security groups. And as Bill said, we started chatting about this issue because what we were beginning to make clear to us was security was not a primary element of the acquisition process. As he said, and I'm now even teaching a course on acquiring emerging technologies, and we have the acquisition experts that are lecturing, and they just basically use the report Deliver Uncompromised because to this point, and it's hard to blame the acquisition community for this because they were getting so much pressure to deliver platforms for the warfighter in a very speedy manner at a good price. And the thought of the concept of our adversaries using not only traditional espionage techniques of flipping people, but starting to focus on the technology was new in a certain way. This idea of using and exploiting technology at this rate and speed, given our technological revolution, opened up a whole new attack surface that we never really had. Remember, we used to think a great penetration was trying to figure out how to mess with an Selectric typewriter or how to mess with a copier. That was sort of the extent of what was considered cutting edge technological espionage work. But I think it started to crystallize around this period that this is a big problem. And we had, for the first time, when I was at the Bureau before we joined NCIX, the first time we had a penetration of the Pentagon using cyber techniques. So, and that was under John Hamre when he was the DepSec, and the Bureau got involved in the investigation. So we were at that moment in which these issues were coming to the fore. And as Bill alludes to, when we started having the conversations, we needed a good phrase that encapsulated what the concept was. And this concept of Deliver Uncompromised as a product became very powerful. And that's when he alluded to, we started talking about the 5 hammers. What were the instruments that the government had in order to give both carrots and sticks to make security a primary focus. And then if you guys remember, it's still in the acquisition community a debate, because when you talk about the three pillars of this sense of performance, the timeliness, and the speed, we had a fight about whether or not security should be a pillar.
Yes.
And that became a big issue inside the building. And then the resolution was that no, it's a base, security is a base, and the pillars are what security stands on. And we said, like, from the business perspective, well, how do you cost that? How are we costing security?
Yeah.
How do we rate security? How do you rate it? And this, as you know, causes extraordinary debate inside the building.
Well, this ended up being that approach, and yes, cost, schedule, performance. Why is security missing? And we mean counterintelligence security, but that approach of saying, well, it's a baseline. It spawned CMMC, which I always say is necessary but not sufficient. But it's very different than saying we're gonna try to lock down the family of risks around an acquisition, and that's a number of things that we'll talk about in the future. So this has been bubbling around. I'll put you guys on gallery here so we can all see each other, or I can from my end. This has been bubbling around then for 10 years, little over, and I've been saying it's probably been started to maybe dawn on people maybe in the 2013 time of frame, 2014, a few, beyond the few practitioners that you're all talking about in the counterintelligence community. With the OPM breach, there it becomes that 90% of the public seem to think that, oh, they're after my credit. No, I mean, this is a FIS operation, Foreign Intelligence Service, going after anything but credit, probably. So this notion, and you referred to the report, I think you're referring to the 2018 report that you and I were authors on, and Bill certainly contributed a lot to from his role in government at the time.
Hence the famous footnote,
yes,
which they identify the famous Mr. Stevens
that's right,
as the originator of the term,
yes,
deliver uncompromised.
Exactly. And you're doing some work in the private sector now, Bill, in that area.
Yes, I'm a professor of practice at a university, and I'm participating in the research that's associated with this and trying to establish really measures of effectiveness for what's now the phrase is uncompromised delivery and sustainment, which was basically deliver uncompromised is what drove that phrasing. That phrase I know now is used in the acquisition community. And the interesting thing about that phrase is that it pertains to basically the uncompromised delivery and sustainment of a workforce, as well as products and services. So I think it's the notion of delivering uncompromised has reached further and further. And the fact that acquisition community even uses that is the intelligence and security community spent a lot of time trying to get that into the acquisition community's 5,000, that's .1 or whatever the regulation.
5,000. It's the 5,000 series .1, correct?
Yeah. So that's acknowledging a role that I would offer that we participated in driving, and we aren't nearly where we need to be as a government, but I think that we that effort back in 2010 and those since then are driving this. I did, by the way, I don't know if I've talked to you guys about this. I did talk to all the first level down acquisition people below the AQ director at the time. And it was interesting to hear their responses. They were all quite concerned when we briefed them on threats, et cetera, and the notion of delivering uncompromised. But when the light went on that it would raise the cost, or they were very concerned. They were generally good Americans concerned about what might be happening, but messing up their process is kind of how they viewed it, having someone else make a judgment on whether or not that things were being delivered uncompromised, or what actually the status of the compromised nature of a weapons capability, for example, caused them great consternation.
So as you know, as Bill alluded to, the attack surface is multi-layered. So we have, the software is an attack surface. I just mentioned the term solar winds as one example that we recently have had. The hardware is an attack surface, how we can mess with the actual platforms. And then the third layer we always talk about is carbon units. You may know them as people. And that's how we have the ability to compromise people, which is this workforce 2.0 concept and insider risk and threat. And then the fourth level is all the comms. So what we know as the internet service providers, or what we call 5G or XG. Each one of these layers is for an adversary is a attack surface that can compromise and get to the information that they are trying to exfiltrate. And that's why this has been a hard problem, because it cuts across so many of the silos that exist in our governmental process in order to lock down the data, the people, and the platforms.
Well,
it's a very interesting point that he just made is the unclassified software and the notion that no matter who's really ultimately responsible, but the notion that unclassified equated to no threat is how a lot of products and services were handled. The reality is everything needs to be looked at through its compromised nature, not because, as you two know, the compromised nature of software and what it is foreign intelligence services do to that software is in fact basically a collection platform that's being used against us quite effectively even still. And it was because we equated unclassified to no threat, and the community went ahead and purchased those capabilities.
Well, the thing that I find, you're exactly right, Harvey, that the way I've explained it is supply chain is not, sort of the standard way that industry looks at it. But I like to look at it, and we did in Deliver Uncompromised the report as a blended operation, which is the syntax that counterintelligence people would use, and that's to say that it's cyber IT, cyber OT, which is sort of the comms piece, the human insider, witting, unwitting, the carbon, as you say, and then formal supply chain, which might be hardware, software, but it could be food, it could be water, it could be whatever it is that you're, and then the adversary, you draw a circle around that, and whatever you're doing in the private sector or the government, whether you're making farm equipment or you're making, medicines or whatever, or weapon systems in defense of the nation, or software management system. There's all those different attack vectors. And in fact, don't think of them like static vectors, that the adversary moves in and out of them as a function of opportunity and access and strategic intent. And so getting back to what's in a name, to me, I spend a fair amount of time talking to private sector companies and the C-suites and how they're dealing with it. And it helps them crystallize that no matter what I'm making, I'm probably some kind of a target, whether it's to steal my IP, to compromise it so it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, to build a human collection network, to build a technical collection network. They're starting to realize, wow, I can't ignore this supply chain security anymore. And it's a big problem, but I got to pick one area to go after first. CMMC is trying to go after sort of the basics for cyber IT. But I've talked to CEOs to say, we really don't know who works for us, right? We've done so many acquisitions in the last 10 years that we've got all these employees and only a third of them are cleared. So the term, I think, tends to crystallize in people's mind. That's the North Star. We have to do that. And to do it, I think we're going to have an offensive and a defensive element. You've said many times, Bill, you can't win by just defending your goal. You can't, but you got to start there. You also can't win if you spend all your time at the other end of the field either. And we've been spending our time at the other end of the field.
To give you an example of the term and the concept. So when we wrote, I have a book out called The National Security Enterprise, navigating the labyrinth that's used in many professional military education institutions. When we wrote that book, and even the second edition of the book, we did not even use the term deliver uncompromised or supply chain. That the national security enterprise had not recognized supply chain issues of being a national security issue. And now you can't open up anything without looking at supply chain, because it became painfully aware, we became aware in the COVID crisis. And we began to see our dependency on countries that are our adversaries for vital aspects of the chain. So I think there's been a whole revolution inside the national security enterprise, thinking through why supply chain is important and why we need to have products delivered uncompromised. So it helped focus the entire community on what this new vulnerability is. And then the second part, which is hard for the community, is that, we think we have a lot of secrets that are really important inside the government, and that, the nuclear codes are sort of significant, and that whole nuclear issue. But in the end, we're in a great power competition. That great power competition turns on economic innovation and viability. And the entities that possess
all in the private sector.
It's all in the private sector.
Yeah.
So this has become another huge disconnect inside the breakdown of the Cold War consensus. When we just were fighting the Soviet Union, the world has changed, the adversaries have changed, the economic playing field has changed, and there is more, the IP and the platforms are owned by the private sector. So it's very odd for the government, because they're used to delivering an effect, and it comes from their submarine, it comes from the fighter plane, it comes from their tank. Well, when you're using cyber-related issues, you don't even actually own the platform by which the attack is taking place. It's owned by a private sector internet service provider.
And now that it's a home game more than an away game, the ability to move energy, information, and money is sort of the triple header, and it's got like zero to do with DoD.
Yes, so this has become, I think, a true existential moment for the department. What is your real role in the future? Because putting steel on target, though significant, it's unclear if that is going to be something that we're going to confront in the near term, or the concept of going to war and what war will mean in these new blended operations is a real challenge for the department.
Well, I was arguing after our report came out that it's this changing character of war. Then Secretary Maddox was, he wrote an article that he was struggling with. He thought his entire career, the character of war never changes. Then he was kind of thinking, well, maybe it is. And I was arguing it has. And the example, I think we had recently bombed Syria or something. And a few months before that, I believe, natural gas pipelines in Andover, Mass were blowing up from overpressure. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that, wow, what if Russia's response, there was no response that I know of, but what if Russia's response or somebody else's was an attack on our infrastructure to the point where it's misattributed, you have no idea what's going on, and there's no one sitting around the president's cabinet to tell him what's going on. That's stopping the strategic intent, because you don't know what's happening at that point.
So as you said, what's the term? So you have to remember, for the last, I want to say, since World War II, in all of the military institutions, the doctrine is von Clausewitz. And von Clausewitz on war has no states this notion of the character of war is always the battle of the wills, which is what Mattis was taught. And as you know, Clausewitz didn't really have an IP address. And so for many theoreticians, trying to think through how this technological change may be so transformative for understanding what a conflict is so hard for generations and generations that were brought up in understanding that it's a battle of will and it's steel on target, as opposed to what we say the final battlefield is, in Mr. Stevens' case, the 8 inches between his ears, as opposed to the average 6 for most people. That it's what the cognitive security of what you think and you believe is becoming an extraordinary battlefield that this world has generated for what you understand is, and you've written about, Chris, which is the blended operations of what war means and the battle of ideas.
You know,
I'll tell you, as we're doing things out there, and I want to throw something to you. As we're doing things out there, I gave a talk yesterday to DIB companies, and you know, sort of the realization coming back in that talk is, wow, you're saying we need counterintelligence people in our companies to at least lead our security. And that's exactly what I'm saying. So, so Bill, as we're off doing stuff, talking to these companies, there's a huge market for skills like you and the, you know, you spent 20 years in OSI as a practitioner.
Let me explain what OSI is, Chris.
Yeah, Office of Special Investigations.
Air Force Office of Special Investigations that does counterintelligence in the Air Force.
So how bad is the problem when you say deliver uncompromised? It's sort of like a challenge to say, show me a program that's of major significance that hasn't been delivered compromise in a way.
So without getting into the military stuff, there's quite a few of them. You see it in the newspaper pretty easily. I think MD Anderson, as far as cancer goes, is something that's not a military thing, but it's very important. You could argue that it's a national security issue in the way that MD Anderson had issues with Chinese taking their technology and information, and just how grave that potentially could be. I think the University of Kansas had an arrest not too long ago in a similar situation having to do with the professor that was taking information. You can point to any of the major defense industry companies, and there are efforts against them every day, and there are successes against them, you know, quite often, even though they're pretty good at doing the work. The recognition that, in fact, our adversaries have the initiative and we're responding to them way more than they're responding to us. They're attacking us and we're defending against their activities, as opposed to us attacking against those that are attacking us to slow them down, to create doubt, regret, and confusion. And that's going to have to occur. There's going to have to be someone's going to have to be identified as, I think, someone or some institution clearly will have to be identified as orchestrating the response to our adversaries. And I've not seen that. We have people who have investigative responsibilities, et cetera, across the board. And we have people that have other responsibilities, but an individual or organization clearly identified to orchestrate a all of nation response. So you guys were making the point, I think, that all the elements of national power are being applied against us to a far greater success than all the elements of national power that we are able to apply them to actually defend the challenge. What we do well is the government stuff, and we do a little less well include, even though they're super able, we just have not orchestrated all of our government elements of national power with academia and industry for a systemic response. And I think that the blended operations, you guys did a great job on that paper, that minor paper. I think that, you know, your comment, my last government position, I can tell you that we were watching efforts against industry by our adversaries. And I can say that actually it's a public report that I think 15% of the reports from industry that were determined to be of a counterintelligence interest, 15% were cyber only, 15% were cyber only, 35% were human only, and 50% were both. So that'll tell you very quickly if somebody concentrates on one area or the other, then they're going to get crushed. A quick example of what that would mean and what typically would occur would be a company might report that foreign government officials were coming to their company for a visit. Those foreign government officials were asking questions they were not supposed to. They did not get the answers from the company, and that those officials left. And within a very short period, they may have been struck with a cyber attack, trying to get the same activity. The opposite is also true, whereas there may have been a cyber activity that had failed to try to get information from a company, and then, you know, not too long after that, a official visit or foreign visitors would show up and would be operating outside the bounds they're supposed to operate to try to gather information that they're not supposed to get. So it is significant, and it is the world we live in today.
Very good. You know, I just say in all the work that we're doing in the different circles we work in and together that, you know, as you sit and think about it, we're helping entities both in government and private sector define what compromised is or uncompromised, and then really working on how do you deliver that. So any final words?
I would say that, you know, what's in a term. So we usually associate sort of breakthrough concepts with certain individuals. So, you know, if I say the term class struggle, you think of Karl Marx. And if you say the term, you know, the Hegelian logic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, there's concepts that really focus what drives things. So this term, deliver on compromise, we have the father of the term here with us. Sort of, you might say the Hegel of counterintelligence. And so that term then generates what you guys know we've been using for quite a while. And it became public through Chris, the report, that then made it sort of a focal point for analyzing how we should go forward.
Right.
And so I'll just repeat what that definition is now, and it did change over the years. It was basically this at the beginning, but you guys certainly added to this, and this is the one that's in the report that you guys wrote. For mission owners, the primary goal, I think that's important to say, the goal of DoD must be to deliver warfighting capabilities to operating forces without their critical information and or technology being wittingly or unwittingly lost, stolen, denied, degraded, or inappropriately given away or sold. I think it's important to say that, you know, there's very few things that are uncompromised, remain uncompromised, and uncompromisable, very few things, because whether it's done wittingly or unwittingly. But this must be the goal, is what I would offer. It's like you know, you may not win every game, but when you start the game, that's your goal. And I think that that's the way it needs to be viewed. A lot of detractors try to say, well, this is impossible. It's ridiculous for you to ask for this. No, we can establish this as a goal, and we can learn how to measure this moving forward. And I propose that we actually have no choice if we want our government and institutions and our way of life to continue.
Yeah, fantastic. Well,
Great.
I think you know, this is the first in a video series and talks and white papers and different consulting opportunities for everybody here, based on Deliver Uncompromised. So we'll be doing this again. And the nice thing is, you know, we could spend the next hour and a half on SolarWinds and Microsoft and the strategic practice and ransom. Yeah, there's just no end to it. So hopefully, you know, as this all continues to evolve, we'll start doing more of these and do some deep dives in specific topics. But I thought it would be good to start with this video on where the terminology came from. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.